where we will be discussing the present and the future of climate action across the African continent. So this comes in just a week before the 11th in Azerbaijan, Baku. And as we know, Africa faces unique challenges when it comes to climate change, whereby we have witnessed extreme weather patterns, we have witnessed droughts, we have witnessed floods. We also have the ongoing fight for sustainable development. But amidst all these challenges, it's also important that we get to understand that despite the challenges, we also have unique opportunities for us as Africa to build resilience, become more innovative, and be able to take strides forward in the green economies. So this webinar will serve as a platform for us to explore those opportunities, providing concrete solutions to adapt, mitigate, and to thrive in a changing climate. So we have distinguished guests lineup, speakers who are both youth leaders, climate experts. We also have policymakers who will be joining us and who will guide us through the complex issues surrounding adaptation, clean energy, and sustainable development. We will begin with insights into the current state of climate change in Africa, and then dive into solutions like clean cooking, climate smart agriculture, and the crucial inclusion of vulnerable groups in climate decision making. So I'll just urge all of us that today we'll be free to engage and be free to ask questions so that we can get more insights, and let's make this engagement be more productive, interactive, and meaningful as we exchange ideas. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Madam Sophia Vanji, the Executive Director of ICHA, Kenya Red Cross, on the side of research. So, Madam Sophia.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody from Nairobi.
Perhaps unmute. We can't hear you clearly.
I am unmuted. Don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Sophia. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Yes, okay. Thank you. So I'm just going to give a few remarks in regards to the International Center for Humanitarian Affairs. We're a humanitarian think tank and hosted by the Kenya Red Cross. And our vision is basically to provide knowledge, evidence, and material that can positively influence the work that we're doing within the humanitarian sector. And so climate is a core theme for the work that we're doing. And for us being part of this webinar and such an event is really an honor, because we're discussing key issues that could influence discussions and outcomes from the COP29. So we're deeply invested in the conversations that will be happening over the next couple of days. And with COP29, as with the last few COPs, I think it's time for Africa to be able to amplify its unique voice as a continent and as a region that is very much affected by the impact of climate change. So through this webinar, we're able to then discuss and explore linking our priorities as a region and as a continent to the goals of COP29. This includes the modalities or the practical application of having financial resources where climate change is being experienced the most, and what does that look like and how do we make that happen. Also, as was mentioned in the opening remarks, in terms of clean energy and new ways of ensuring food security, what's the role that we can play and what are our priorities in ensuring that we get the support that we need to make sure that we not only adapt to the change that's going on, but we now mitigate any sort of future impact. Innovation is also a key pillar for us as a humanitarian sector, and climate innovation is really picking up speed. But what we need to remember is that a lot of these ideas and these innovations need to come from communities that are facing the impact of climate change. They need to be the driving force behind a lot of the thinking around innovation. And we need to be able to test and implement a lot of these innovations in a very ethical and practical way. And then, of course, the last thing I want to mention is inclusive climate action, and that this response or these actions are not for single organizations or single companies to tackle alone, but instead we really need to focus on what are the roles that each of us play and how do we come together to actually make an impact for these communities that are being affected by climate change, and how do we look at populations that are directly affected the most. So we're talking about women, the elderly, people living with disabilities, and how do we make sure that all solutions and all conversations have these marginalized groups or these affected groups at the center of the discussion that we're having. So with that, I would just like to say that, again, we're really honored to be part of this webinar, where we have our colleagues joining a couple of the panel discussions, and we're just really excited to see what comes out of this and how we can then package some of these discussions to then take forward as we continue to prepare for COP. So thanks again for having us, and all the best.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Sophia, for the opening remarks and setting up the pace. So swifting quickly and perhaps just to take us through some of the key takeaways from Madam Sophia, she has emphasized on the need for a focus on the financial resources, and she has also highlighted the importance of having the views of the communities who are on the front line. This entails the most vulnerable to the climate change impacts. And the third key takeaway has been the need for an inclusive approach. And as we head to the next session, which will be a keynote address on climate change effects and progress in Africa, which will be done by Mr. Adam Mwalin, Head of Climate Dialogue. We don't have time.
Hello, Victor.
Yes, Mr. Adam.
Thank you for inviting me to this. And I mean, I think maybe a lot of you who are here might not know who I am or what We Don't Have Time is. So I'll take a few minutes to introduce my background first to give you an idea of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, so We Don't Have Time is a media platform for climate solutions. We're based out of Sweden, but we operate globally, and we're looking to support solutions all over the world to share the word globally and get these innovations and solutions that Sophia talked about to be known across the world, and so that the right people will learn about the solutions that exist and who has the solutions, essentially. Because the solutions for climate, they do exist, and I think in a lot of cases the communities that are experiencing the problems always have the best solutions. So we hope that by being here we can be a part of helping more people know about the solutions that exist. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Adam Walin, for the breakdown. And perhaps for the participants, in case of any questions, you can feel free to write them in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. So to you, Mr. Adam Molen, well, I have a question for you. As the largest platform, we don't have time as one of the largest platforms for climate change dialogue. What do you believe are some of the key drivers for accelerating climate action, especially in Africa and the global south?
Yeah, thank you. So I think to identify the key driver, I think we need to look at one of the key challenges that we've found, and that is that I think the knowledge of the climate crisis is increasing, and it's becoming obvious for a lot of people, especially here in Europe, now that we're experiencing the extreme weather events that I think especially a lot of people in Africa have been experiencing for a long time, that are directly exacerbated by climate change. And I think the knowledge is starting to be, it's starting to become hard to deny the negative aspects of the climate crisis. But there's still a challenge in that people aren't attributing that knowledge into action. And one reason for that is that a lot of people still feel like they are alone in worrying about the climate crisis. I think we're not talking enough about it, and I think people have this false idea that no one else cares. And I think that idea comes a lot from the political leadership we're seeing across the world, where there are a lot of political leaders who aren't taking sufficient action. And I think we could see that very clearly now with the end result of the biodiversity meeting COP16, which just wrapped up in Colombia, where the leaders couldn't come up with a financing solution for biodiversity solutions. And I think that's a clear example of the lack of willpower we're seeing in the political sphere. But so with that being said, I think the key driver here is the people. I think the regular, if I want to say that in quotes, regular people, us who are experiencing this on a daily basis and who are trying to make changes in our daily lives to reduce our emissions and get around these problems and adapt to the climate crisis, I think we have more power than we think. I mean, we can influence politicians, we can come up with solutions, we can find ways to connect across borders. The internet is a massive tool in this. You can see this just from this webinar where we have people from different countries. We can, by just using the knowledge and the voice that we have, we can accelerate climate actions, and that will do two things. One of them is that the finances that exist in private capital, which I think is really crucial for African nations, that can be unlocked if the solutions that exist in Africa are more well known. And when this private capital becomes unlocked and when the opportunities become clear, then that's when policymakers can follow and really unlock this huge public capital, which we're trying to push in the COPs, etc., trying to get these rich nations to share their wealth and enable all of the solutions that already exist. I think by connecting the people who have the solutions with the right people, I think we can start unlocking these finance flows, which of course are a necessary driver for climate innovation. And through that, we can create sort of a flood wave, and we can kind of expand the rate of which we enable climate solutions, not only here in Sweden, but all over the world. That's what I would say.
Yeah, well said, Mr. Wallin. And on the question of knowledge, of this knowledge getting to the right people and how the people can then perceive this information, which takes me to just another question about the role of the media then in setting the agenda, even informing the people, giving the people this knowledge. What are some of the challenges that, as a media platform, you would point out that the media faces in in sharing this information and disseminating it to the people?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a very good question, because I think we're seeing very clearly now these past few years that the topic of the climate crisis is not a long-lived media story, and that's an issue, because the solutions to the climate crisis need to be long-term, and when traditional media lose interest of climate change, when extreme weather events become more common, when heat temperatures keep happening, media don't want that repetitiveness, traditional media, and that means that they turn to other issues, which are of course super important, like the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and all of these other terrible things that are happening across the world. They need to be reported, but that therein comes the challenge that the media typically can't focus on more than one crisis at once. And that's why we at Windows Time, we're trying to always stay focused on the crisis that we want to focus on, which is the climate crisis. But that can mean that there is a challenge in public perception and in how people turn away from one crisis to focus on another. And I think as a media sector, the whole media sector needs to have a more holistic approach to the multiple, the intersectional crises that we are seeing in the world. We need to look at them all at the same time. We need to look at what can we do to help people both adapt to climate change, get out of climate change, and get out of hunger and poverty and war. I think we need to look at how can we solve all of these solutions at once. And for that, we need a myriad of solutions. We need all stakeholders to kind of band together to do that. And that's what we're really trying to do at We Know the Time, is we're trying to bring all of the solutions together, even though we're focusing on climate specifically. We're trying to bring everyone that are working on it into one space and one discussion. And we're trying to really, no matter where in the world you're from, you can be a part of the solution. And I think that's something that the media sector needs to focus on more. Like, how can we all be a part of the solution on a structural scale? Because these crises we're seeing, they are structural crises, and we need to solve them.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Wallin, for the insights. And perhaps just to build up on the same point is that having been in the space and having interacted with the financial institutions, you've also interacted with some of the policy makers, and I've also interacted with some of the communities who are on the front line and are actually faced with these challenges of the climate crisis impacts. What could you point out as some of the gaps in getting this information to really move from the communities affected at the front line and getting this same information to the policymakers so that it can inform them during the formulation and therefore the implementation of these policies that therefore assist in building the resilience? What could you point as some of the gaps?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's so hard for me personally on a private perspective. From a private perspective, it's really difficult for me to understand how these world leaders can be a part of these crucial global climate meetings and see the destruction which the climate crisis is bringing in all parts of the world and still talk about it in terms of economics. Because that's always the crux, right? It's that the climate crisis is unique. Well, it's not unique, but the climate crisis is one of these crises that are heavily vested into existing financial incentives, which means that, of course, the climate crisis is directly caused by the fossil fuel industry, which creates a lot of economical benefits for a lot of people. And I think there is a gap there in understanding that trying to preserve this economic status quo will not work in the long term. There is a lack of long-term perspectives, which might be caused by the fact that most democratic countries have election cycles of 4 to 5 years, which means that politicians are not incentivized to implement policies that would hurt them in the short term, but save them in the long term. And that also applies to financial institutions. A lot of financial institutions only look at what will help them in the short term. And at that point, showing them stories from the front lines in Africa of all of the terrible things that some of you endure, there's a disconnect there because they can't connect that to what they are investing in. So I think, from our perspective, from your perspective, from all of our perspective, all we can do is try to continue to emphasize that these extreme weather events that we're seeing now in Valencia, that we're seeing now in Nigeria, that we're seeing everywhere, they will become the norm if we don't stop this. And whether or not we want to, we will stop using fossil fuels. Either we do it willingly and we ramp it down in a fast but manageable manner, and we come out with a society which is better for everyone, or we keep going as we are right now, and we hit the wall where everything crashes down, and we are forced to stop burning fossil fuels because either they run out or we come to a point where the effects of climate change are so obvious that we're forced to stop. And then at that point, we won't have much of a society left to fall back on. And I think that's the message that a lot of climate scientists now are starting to be able to put on the table, because now the science is even more than ever super clear on the fact that we are approaching tipping points that we cannot reverse. And when we hit those tipping points, we will change the climate in a way which is almost impossible to reverse. And we can now say that with scientific backing, and that is what we need to do towards policymakers, towards financial institutions, to hopefully eventually get them to understand that whether or not they stop investing in fossil fuels now, they will lose money. And they will lose much more money if they don't stop now. And that's really the big thing. So there is a yearly report that I want to inform all of you about, which is coming out from the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research and a bunch of others, which is called the Planetary Health Check. And I would recommend everyone to look that up and share that with everyone you know, because that is probably the strongest argument I've ever seen for why we need to stop burning fossil fuels as soon as possible. Because the science is super clear about what will happen if we don't stop. And some of the economic consequences are dire.
Well, thank you so much for the insights, and that's quite informative and detailed on the aspects about the information dissemination, the perception of this information on climate change, which therefore gets to impact even the climate actions that are partaken by the people on the front lines, by the policymakers. And so perhaps as we continue, I'll just remind us that we are live on Switch Media's digital platforms, so you can catch us and get involved on YouTube or Facebook. And perhaps to the participants who are available, in case of any questions to Mr. Wallen, you can just raise your hand, or you can drop your question in the chat box before we get to the next session. Well, as we wait for the participants to share their questions, perhaps, I'll just ask you one more last question.
Yep.
I'll ask you one more last question, Mr. Wallen, and this will be about the issue on adaptation and mitigation. because we've seen that in these forums of the UNFCCC, there's been a push for the loss and damage, for the operationalization of the loss and damage. When we look at the situation in the global south and Africa, we get to realize that most of the communities on the front line are forced to come up with other options and build resilience in their own way, of which they barely get a funding for. So we've seen that a priority for the African negotiators this year is going to be adaptation as one of them, because it is a critical aspect for the populations in the global south in response to these climate shocks. So perhaps having obtained views maybe from the global perspective, how could you advise that this is reported on and this is approached during the COP29 negotiations for a fruitful outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be brutally honest with this and say that the loss and damage fund negotiations have been a serial failure every COP since COP26. So we did come a small part of the way in COP26 in Glasgow in 2021, where we decided that there was going to be a loss and damage fund. That was a small step in the right direction, but the existence of the fund means nothing if there's no money in it. And the failure to actually put money into that fund every year since then has been nothing short of a failure. And I think that is something that we as media organizations cannot be harsh enough on, because the loss and damage fund is one of the singular most important pieces of negotiation that happens on any of these COPs, and it has been for many, many years at this point. And I think trying to separate mitigation and adaptation is foolish, because we cannot have mitigation without adaptation. We need, the reason for us to mitigate our emissions is that we want to live in a world, a society which is livable in the future. And without adaptation, we won't be able to do that because of the heat warming that we've already locked in with our emissions. And I mean, African countries and other countries in the global south are already witnessing this, are already struggling with this. And the fact that we're not able to put the money where our mouth is yeah, it's very disappointing. And I'm ashamed, as a member of the European Union, I'm ashamed that we haven't been able to come further in that. So, I mean, as for your question of how we as media should be talking about this, I think we should just be really honest and say that we must come further than this. We must have come further than this at this point. We cannot be in a point where the loss and damage fund is still essentially empty in the year 2024. That just cannot happen, and it's a travesty that has happened so far. So, yeah, that's something that I'm happy to hear that the African negotiators are putting even more emphasis on, because every negotiator should, to be honest.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mr. Wallin, for the insights. And that will take us, as we wait for the questions, I hope you are still with us. So we will therefore head to the next session. And then in case of the questions, during the Q&A session, you will have the chance to respond to some of the questions that might arise. Yeah, so
Great.
Thank you so much. So in the meantime, we head to the next session, which is about the clean cooking towards a green economy in African nations. And here we will be taken through by Mr. Ash Sharma, the Vice President of the Nordic Green Bank, who will give us therefore a breakdown of why it's important that clean cooking is embraced in African nations and why it's crucial, especially when we are talking on the climate change conversation, because according to some reports, when there is no clean cooking, when we rely on the traditional means of cooking, which is a major aspect of the cooking in the African nations, there has been issues about the health concerns coming from the traditional methods, and I'll just let Mr. Ash Sharma take us through that. Welcome, Mr. Sharma.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Great, great. Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience on this issue, very important issue of clean cooking. So what I would like to do really, first of all, to introduce our organization. We are a Nordic institution which is working with environmental issues globally. And in my unit, we're working primarily, the so-called special funds, we're working primarily in Africa. And we have two instruments. We have one which is the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, which is in essence an off-grid electrification program, which is working in 6 countries. And we have a program which you mentioned, the Modern Cooking Facility Africa, which is also working in 6 countries. Some of them are the same. And in both cases, what we do is we work with so-called results-based financing. And what this means is that we work primarily with private sector companies. And what we hope to do is to support those companies in their endeavors to scale clean cooking solutions or off-grid electricity access. So the reason why we do this is that we believe that obviously public money is limited. We know the domestic funds are limited, and we know that the bulk of the investments that will be made in this area will be, or the heavy lifting, I would say, will be done by the private sector. They have the capital, they have the know-how, they have the technology, and they have the desire to scale their operations. But of course, as we know, many of the countries have very challenging business environments, not least of all, the elephant in the room in these financial discussions is often this issue of affordability. And I'll come back to this issue because it's a big challenge at the moment, and always has been, actually, always has been. So I think the situation is that we know that there are over 600 million people in Africa who are working and cooking with traditional biofuels. We know that this leads to a number of problems around deforestation. We know that there are very significant health impacts. There are several millions of people who are dying prematurely, and it's if we're honest, it's a blight on humanity that people are cooking with fuels which are in essence killing them. So I think there are lots of impacts, of course, in terms of the gender impacts are very significant. We know that these challenges affect women and children disproportionately. They're the ones in the kitchen. They're at the low level for the kids who basically are asphyxiating with this with particularly charcoal and traditional fuels. But we know also that there are very good alternatives out there. We know that there are better stoves. We know that there are stoves which use less firewood, half the firewood, but even better than that. And I think we can do better. There are technologies which use pellets, which are using, for example, sawmill waste, which burn very cleanly. They're very nice cooking implements. Some of them are very aspirational products. We also know that LPG has a role to play. LPG is seen very much as an aspirational fuel, but there are fossil fuel implications, and it's seen by some as being a stepping stone to a cleaner future. We know there are biogas projects, some very interesting technologies out there which can be used particularly for farmers. If you have at least 2 cows, then it's possible that a biodigester could be for you. And last and by no means least, given we're talking primarily about Kenya here, I believe, the role of biofuels, or liquid biofuels, bioethanol is very, very important. So we know that there are lots of clean cooking technologies out there. And what we would like to do is to support the private sector in scaling some of these technologies to make them more affordable. So yes, if I would pause there, then just to say that we do see that there are possibilities. Our financing instrument is geared towards supporting companies in doing so. And what's really important we found is that the business model, the pay-go business model, which you've seen working so well in the off-grid electricity sector, and East Africa is the home of mobile pay. And we see that this has worked really well in the off-grid space with solar home systems and so forth, but it hasn't worked with clean cooking, and we'd like to try and find out why and to promote that opportunity. And secondly, the other major driver in terms of the business model is carbon financing, and we know this from our own experience. I was very fortunate to work on one of the first, I believe, carbon project in Kenya, which was back in 2000, which was the Mumias sugar factory, very famous in Kenya, of course, and known throughout the region. And that was a clean development project. So we know that carbon finance can work. Unfortunately, this clean development mechanism pretty much bypassed Africa. We know that Asia made got a lot of funding from that source, and we want to make sure that the African continent doesn't miss out again. So I think there are some interesting carbon financing opportunities which we would like to support our companies with. And finally, if you allow me, I'd like to shine a light really on the companies that we work with, the companies that we support financially. So to give a shout out to the companies like ACE Hybrid Energy. They're working in Kenya. ACE is providing gasifier stoves, and we work with them hopefully to try to deploy up to 13,000 of these stoves. They're very interesting products which use briquettes using sugar bagasse, which we know there's a lot of that in the region. So it's a clean fuel, and it's a modern fuel. It's a tier 3 plus in the framework. And these are very interesting stoves. They also integrate solar panels and lamps for lighting and phone charging. So we have some good technologies out there that we know are working pretty well. We also work with EcoSafi. Some of you will be familiar with them. I would say one of the leading companies in this area. They are working with a very advanced stove, and their business model is very much driven by carbon finance. So they use the carbon market to bring down the price of the fuel, and their business model is around the fuel sales. The stove is very highly subsidized, and again, to see this equipment, they are very much aspirational, clean burning products, and they aim actually to sell these below the price of traditional fuels over a longer period. We also work with Burn manufacturing. Burn is very famous, of course, in East Africa. It's one of the leading companies in the clean cooking space, Burn manufacturing. But they're also working with e-cooking, electric cooking. So we're very keen to acknowledge that there is an opportunity for electric cooking in this space as well. And the final project I would mention, the fourth company that we work with, is a company called Home Biogas Systems, and they work with these 6 cubic meter biodigesters, and they also provide a 2-burner stove With that, the focus is very much on dairy farmers. The other benefit, of course, is that with all biodigesters is that you get a very clean fuel, but you also get fertilizers, which are used. So you use the cattle manure, and this is a very good example of the circular economy, which can benefit Africans. And there we have a program with them to support up to 34,000 of these units. So we support these companies by subsidizing them, but we do that in a very smart way, meaning that we tend to focus very much on supporting sustainable businesses. We don't think of these as grants. We want them to be sustainable companies that will continue to work in Kenya long after our funding has gone.
Yeah.
So just to give you an overview on that, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Sharma, for the breakdown. And we can already tend to visualize how clean cooking is there for being taken into the grassroots regions, because the challenge is majorly in the communities who are unable to access even these new clean cooking technologies. And it's a great pleasure that you are then able to subsidize these companies, and then they're able to take these solutions to the ground and therefore be able to support the communities to overcome the challenge of relying on the traditional means of cooking. And perhaps I open the Q&A session to Mr. Sharma. In case any participant has a question, they can feel free to ask, raise their hands, or write in the Q&A. In the meantime, I'll ask you the first question, Mr. Sharma. Maybe just highlighting and elaborating, what are some of the challenges in integrating the clean cooking solutions into the mainstream green economy policies, especially in the global south or within the African countries?
Yeah. Well, I think I would say, if I could turn it around, I would say there's an opportunity here. We see that this is an important part of the green economy.
Okay.
And we know that countries like Kenya and Zambia, for example, also have seen this possibility, and they see the opportunities to promote clean cooking. And we've seen, for example, Burn Manufacturing is a very good example of a company which is established in Kenya. It employs a lot of people in Kenya, and is exporting throughout the region. So I would say that's a very good example of a very state-of-the-art manufacturing. I visited their factory outside Nairobi, and I must say it's very, very impressive. It will not be out of place in Europe, for example. So we see real opportunities to see how African countries can really scale up in terms of their aspirations. We know that there are lots of innovations on the continent. So I would say that there are more opportunities than there are challenges. Of course, we know the challenges, and we hear them all the time. We know that there are difficulties in maybe importing certain types of equipment. We know that there are skills shortages. We know that there are challenges with the currencies and so forth. But we also know that there are a good labor force. There are qualified people. There are people who are interested in working, and there are plenty of consumers out there. So I think Kenya has really thrown out the welcome mat for investors, and I think this should not be underestimated. That if you are willing to attract businesses with good, stable conditions, can build good companies, then those companies can flourish, and then they should pay taxes. They should employ people. They should invest in the local economies, as we're seeing. So I think there's a lot of possibilities and opportunities out there.
Well, that sounds quite great, and I love the approach that you've given it, that instead of viewing it as a challenge, it's more of a great opportunity for us to then bank on the available resources, like the human capital, like the innovations. And then that takes me to the next question, which is about the financing. And therefore, I'll ask that how can then the international financing and the green transition funds be better directed toward the clean cooking initiatives that are available in Africa?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the good question. I think, of course, we would like to see more funding coming to this area. We know that the commercial banks are, if we're honest, pretty much not interested in this sector. They don't see the opportunities there. They look very much at the base of pyramid customers and shake their heads and say, look, this is not something that we are interested in. So it's been very challenging, and I think that the role of public money, let's say from the global north, has been really around mobilization, crowding in private financing. So there are guarantee schemes. There are programs like ours, for example, which support companies. But again, recognizing that they should seek a profit motive. The real challenge, I guess, is that the affordability levels are very, very low. I was actually in Nairobi just a few weeks back for the Gogla conference, and there were people from all over the world there, right, and all over Africa. One of the most shocking facts that came out of that discussion, and it relates to the off-grid electricity sector, was that around half, 51% of all potential customers cannot afford to make the monthly payments on tier one systems. Even for me, this was quite shocking because we hadn't expected these numbers to be so high. So we're looking at business models that can really support these types of companies, and I'm afraid that it's often not enough to provide the guarantees and the programs that we have, and we should look at some of these other other opportunities like end user financing. So this is when you basically target very much a payment towards the poorest. It's been working, for example, in Uganda. They're working on this program right now. There are some design challenges there, lessons we can learn from that. But I think that's something we will need to look at for the base of pyramid customers. So I think that there are lots of financing challenges, and clean cooking is in an even more difficult situation than the off-grid electricity space, because we don't have enough good examples of companies that are working well. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, sure. Those are quite valuable insights, and I'd like to say thank you so much for giving us a detailed description of what really goes on in the clean cooking space. And perhaps my last question will just be an inquiry, if possible, for you to name the 6 countries that these operations have begun within the continent.
Okay, thank you. So we have in East Africa, we're working in Kenya and Tanzania. In Southern Africa, we are working in Zambia and in Mozambique. We are also working in DRC. We have a possibility also to work in Malawi as well. And what I would do is, if I will put into the chat, I can put the Modern Cooking Facility for Africa website, and you can see who all our investees are and where our programs are. I can put that in the chat now.
Yeah, sure, do so. And well, that brings us to the end of the session on clean cooking.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Welcome. If there are no more questions for Mr. Sharma, I just realized that if there's any question, feel free to raise your hand. Well, I just realized that you were joined by Mr. Mavuti, who had not been available earlier on. Hello, Mr. Alex Mavuti. Mr. Alex Mavuti is the Africa Regional Focal Point, major group for Africa children and youth. Hello, Mr. Alex. hey, that it seems not to be responding, so it could be technical issues. That takes us to the last panel discussion for today. Remember, today is our day one, then tomorrow we'll be having the day two of our meeting. So the last panel discussion will be about the inclusion of all in matters of climate change. And here we will be engaging with Mr. Boniface Odhiambo. He's the Economic Recovery Advisor of the International Rescue Committee. And then we'll also be engaging with Mrs. Joanna Osawe, the President and Founder, Women in Renewable Energy, WIRE, the acronyms. And then we'll also be joined by Alijawad Molu, who is the founder of Solutions Africa. That said and done, maybe we could have a brief breakdown from Mr. Odhiambo, and then he gets followed by Mrs. Anila Noor. Mrs. Anila Noor is the Policy Advisor on Diversity, Integration, and Gender Inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Just confirm you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. Thank you so much. And I really have to appreciate our first speakers, the valuable contributions. Was quite inspired by the issue of the clean cooking, which is quite inspirational. And I believe many of our listeners and those who are in this forum are able to learn much on that. So as you mentioned, I'm Boniface Odhiambo. I work for International Rescue Committee, which is an international humanitarian organization. Primarily, we work with the displaced persons. IRC have worked in the country for now since 1992, that is Kenya, where we implement, and our work is more on the emergency response to drought, floods, and other resilient interventions that will support refugees and displaced persons programming. So in talk about inclusivity, International Rescue Committee has served quite a number of, I can say, those who have been marginalized and those who are basically affected by climate change. And our main goal is to see more of inclusivity and also aligning the conversation on climate resilience, on how the government and other different stakeholders become complementing their work, that is, to ensure that we build up resilient communities and also push the conversation around how the relevant mitigation adaptation measures can be deployed. This we do through more or less looking at disaster risk reductions. We're looking at the anticipatory action programming. We are also keen to, work on the response, whatever we have disaster related to climate change, talk of floods, talk of drought. So in basically making resilient communities for IRC, our main goal is just to see that we mitigate on these key challenges within the humanitarian sector, as well as offering emergency assistance for critical services. Our operations within the country is in the majorly Garissa County, in Uganda, the Dadaab refugee complex, Turkana County, Kakuma, and also you'll find our work within the ASAL areas of West Pokot, as well as also within the urban, within Nairobi, Nairobi Metropolitan. So with that highlights, allow me just to make a quick note when we speak about inclusivity, and also when we talk about the marginalized and how those who we may call the voiceless may be left out as we speak about climate change, and also we look at their inclusion. In Kenya currently is hosting close to 800,000 refugees. And from this, you will realize that most of these refugees, where they settle and where they are earning their livelihood, are majorly in geographic areas that highly affected by issues of climate change. You talk of the Garissa County, talk of Turkana County. These areas are really, they have really felt the impact of, harsh climatic conditions, floods, drought, whatever comes in, and this disrupts their lives. We have also seen, more refugee influx as a result of climate change in our neighboring countries. So with this, it comes really with a lot of understanding that with this population as part of our community, we must really come with better pathways of climate resilience, which will look at what are the best innovative approaches that will foster adaptations, resilience, sustainable development, both for the host communities, which I mean the locals where the refugees stay with, and also those who come into the country. So in further context, you look at that climate change exacerbates already challenging conditions, which, when you look at the basic livelihood sources of access to water, food, energy, all these factors are critical in their livelihoods. But with the impact of climate change, there's a lot of limitation to see how the displaced persons and those who are marginalized be able to continue their normal livelihood as a result of, missing or, lack of food, lack of better energy, and look at, access to clean water. So we do look at, in terms of work and some of the innovations and some of the programs that we do, is to see how do we come with locally, based innovations or localized innovations that would really spur and make these marginalized persons be more resilient. Talk of one, climate smart agriculture, which is basically anchored as more of the foundations of food security, where they are being taught on different, and small scale or more so like avenues on how they can come up with resilient agricultural practices, and also how they can be able to use this as a source of food and also a source of food pathway. Then also just to mention, more or less also the conversation around building inclusive climate policies and partnership with the different local actors. When we are working in this space, we are keen to see on how we engage the government, we engage the local and the national government in terms of how do the policies and laws that come up basically respond and resonates also with the inclusion of the marginalized population.
Okay.
Lastly, I'll also just speak to the aspects also on looking at different skills training and employment within the green jobs, which I think are better avenues of making the communities more resilient. Maybe I can stop there and over to you, Victor.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Boniface, for the insightful presentation and the details that you've offered us. So I'll give the space to Mrs. Anila Noor to also give us a breakdown of about the policy advice and some of the diversity integration and the aspect of gender inclusion. And then finally, we will have Eliane, who will be speaking on behalf of the children's inclusion and some of the roles that they could play. Thank you. Take it over, Mrs. Anila.
Thank you so much. I'm just checking you can all hear me very well, right?
Yeah, sure. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this invitation. And when I joined, I was listening to other panelists who are talking about clean cooking, and before me, the panelists talking about the refugees. I will share what we are trying to do to bring not only the impact of the climate, but the impact of displacement. Because being engaged from last two COP, we felt this is very disconnection happening, and how we can make sure when we are talking about inclusion, when we are talking about the solution, when we are talking about more climate-based approaches to reduce the risk, there should be have the impact of gender analysis, to have the understanding of local realities and the displacement. Because we know our communities who are living in the displacement setting, they're already very much vulnerable and their situation is very much sensitive. So how we can make sure we are not making them more vulnerable, right? So this is very important to bring such kind of policies implementation where they can be involved on a meaningful participation. That's why we are advocating for meaningful participation with the understanding of gender, understanding of local realities, and understanding how these policies will be implemented on a local level. Because if I'm based in Europe, right, but I grew up in Asia, but how we can understand different part of the African reality, right? So this is very important how we engage and give the exposure to this global discussion and then bring back those global discussion to the local level, but with the gender and with the length of displacement. Because people who are living in the camps, especially women, they are already having very much lack of understanding when it's come to engagement, when it's come to labor market, when it come to education, when it's come to the safe environment. There are so many cases has been recorded in the gender-based violence. But when we having situation of floods, when we are having situation of any kind of natural disaster, these displaced community become more at the forefront to get more exposure to the vulnerabilities. That's why what we are trying to do as new women connectors, we are trying to bring these voices on the seat, on the table of the policy domain, but also giving their capacity building. We are mentoring them. We are bringing them as an ambassador, not only as a storyteller, but as an ambassador. So they know what's the problem according to them. So they can understand which policy, which stakeholder, which UN entity, which state is responsible. So we can create accountability lens. And then when we're going back to evaluate the impact of these policies. So this is very important. We are advocating for meaningful participation in the gender and intersectional end. This is one point. Second point is like how we can also unpack whatever is happening, especially in the climate discussion. This is unfortunately Western approaches, Western-minded implementation and the design. So how we can unpack them and to bring back to the local reality. So this is very important. We are trying to bring local solution and to give the visibility to women-led organization, how much they are working and how we can connect them to the policy implementation. And also lastly, very important resources. Resources are key and there should be more trainings, there should be more resources, and there should be more exposure to this global regional level discussion where we can have more discussion like this. So we can learn from each other. We can learn and exchange each other, and but also bring back to the reality like there's no other than this world. So we are working together with the whole of the society, and then we can work together to see how we are jointly working together to create more resilience, systematic justice, and the climate justice. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sanila, for the breakdown and giving us those insights about the need for inclusion, about the need for the meaningful engagement, and also revealing to us that displacement further increases the exposure to vulnerability, especially of those most vulnerable, as they become impacted even the more from the climate crisis impacts. And then I'll take it over to Ms. Eliane.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eliane Wanjiko Klasingadar. I am 14 years old and I am Africa's youngest climate finance and health champion. I'm also a student in school, but I'm also CEO and founder of two nonprofit organizations, Children with Nature and the Children with Nature Tree Seedlings Group. So my journey started, a lot of people ask me this question, how did I start? Because I'm 14 and this is quite an early age to start this amazing life journey. So I started in kindergarten. I was doing a project about heroes, and I was 4 years old at that time. And we were learning about the heroes of the world who made a difference. So like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, all the people that created a shift in the way humans think or the way humans act. And so we also learned about Professor Wangar Maathai, And I loved her story, and I just loved how she took action to change, her community and the women and the people, and how she was very brave, and how she even risked her own life to save Kura Forest, which now is one of Kenya's prized possessions. So I fell in love with her story, and I really wanted to be like her. So I followed in her path, and I started planting trees. And I planted 10 trees, 10 became 30, 30 became 40, and so far I've planted 1.3 million trees. And I'm hoping to plant 1 trillion more by the time I reach the age of 18, and it's possible with action. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. With what we've heard, it's so important that we take away from this meeting, action should be taken. We cannot afford to let another COP pass by where nothing has been done. Things do happen in COP, and I've heard it. We have progress that's been made, we have action that's been taken. But I want to hear, like, the temperatures have decreased, I don't know, about 5%, and we are living in a sustainable temperature where we no one feels in danger, land is not getting under sea level. I want to hear that Japan is, probably coming back to normal, and we can see Japan, all these things where we're not letting climate change be our issue, and we're letting other things that are fundamental be our issue. And we need to understand that with all the investments that we have made into climate change, how can we reduce the risk in those investments? And how can we create sustainable, just, and fair, and better investments in our nature? For example, in SDG 14, we need to understand that we need to be sustainable with how we think and how we act. But my takeaway from this meeting is take action. We cannot afford for another COP20, another COP30 to happen, or another COP to happen, and we have not taken action. So I need to emphasize to you, listen to the people who are in the face and in the heat of climate change. Listen to the people who are vulnerable, because they speak from first-hand point of view. They speak from a primary source of view. So we need to understand that we need to listen to them and help them and navigate through this issue that we have and find the solutions and start taking action with the solutions. We know what we have to do. We have amazing science who can tell what the weather is going to be like in, I don't know, 3 weeks from now, 2 days from now. So we need to understand that with the knowledge that we have and with the new resources that's coming up like AI, we can actually start taking action and making Africa, as it already has been, but making Africa the breadbasket of the world, not just to help other continents, but also to help itself. Africa is one of the strongest continents, in my opinion. We have always been, and we will always continue to be. So let's take action and let's work together, because the only way that we'll be able to take action and save the world is working together and letting kids like me, or letting other kids, especially the ones who face the heat of climate change, having opportunity to speak from their experience. Because it's important. You can have a world leader speaking on his experience or on their experience as a leader of a nation, but the power that someone who's been through these issues that we talk about is really key. So my take from this is, please take action and make your investment smart, and yeah, just take action, because we have to learn how to save ourselves. But yeah, and listen to the children. But thank you very much. Asanteni sana, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Mungu kubariki, and thank you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eliane. Thank you so much for the insightful, and congratulations for the journey, and congratulations for the focus in this environmental space, especially advocating for these changes that we need to see and advocating for a better natural world. So I'll start with asking you a question before you get to drop off. For you as a young person, as a child in the space, what could you point out as been the major challenges that you faced, and what could assist other young children navigate more easily in these spaces?
So, number one, mentorship is a good thing. I tend to mentor a lot of kids because sometimes they need to learn how to, navigate and, who to talk to or who to ask to take action. But number two is we are very open-minded, and we're very fast with learning. Now that we have phones and social media, and we are in an age that grew up with social media or phones and technology around us, we know how to navigate with that. And we've seen it in Kenya. I mean, the Gen Z are just taking over the world. But learning how to give them the the sources or the platforms to emphasize how they're feeling or what they think is really important for their country and their community is really important. So I'm not going to focus on the hard things. Of course, as a young person, it's kind of hard to be taken seriously. But I mean, as long as you have the fire in the belly, then you're really going to come out. So I think the best thing is giving them the platforms to speak from their heart and from their mind, and let them speak, because we know what we want. Because the reason I'm here is because I know what I want for my future. I don't want to have to live wearing an oxygen mask or carrying an oxygen tanker on my back every day. That's not how I want to live, I want to live in a world where I can see beautiful indigenous trees, maybe even trees that almost went extinct, and I'd be like, okay, fine, we made a difference. The people, the adults, the world leaders actually said it's time to take action. And so, yeah, giving kids the platforms and giving them the ability to speak for themselves and for their future is really, really important. And so, yeah, I think that's the big thing. That's the key thing for us to make a difference and for us to have youth involved. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the contributions, and we take it to Mrs. Anila. Mrs. Anila, just before you drop out,
Thank you.
we have a question for you that we'd like your contributions on. Well, how do gender and diversity considerations shape climate change policy, particularly when addressing the needs of women and the marginalized groups?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, it's not about only women. It's not about only marginal community. It's about how we are bringing equality and equity. And because these vulnerable communities and women, they are at the forefront, that's why they become more victim when this kind of disaster happens or that we are planning without involving them. So that's why we need to have this gender inclusion lens. So we keep talking about to make it intersectional lens. It's not like we are adding on to the problem, right? So this is very important from the beginning. We start involving them to give them understanding and to understand their problem before putting the solution. So that's why it's very important. Otherwise, we again creating discrimination, tokenization, exploitation, and then they are the mostly vulnerable communities and mostly women and children who will be getting the more impact and effect from the disaster or wrong policy. So that's why it's very important to bring the gender and intersectional lens in the policy domain.
Well, that's just a follow-up question. How then can the international organizations offer the support to these adaptation needs that those on the front line are faced with or tend to come up with?
Yeah, I will say if the power is with the people. We as the community leaders, we need to start stand together. That's why I'm joining your call to showcase and to start saying no to this international and especially UN silos who are not helping us, but treating us as a vulnerable and treating us as a beneficiary. So we need to work together and to say no. And we need to take the power back to our community, back to us from the ground. So it's very important we understand and we don't let anyone to exploit our knowledge, our lives, and our earth.
That said, thank you so much, Ms. Sanila, for your time and the contributions. This takes us to Mr. Boniface Odhiambo, our first speaker in the inclusion of all in matters of climate change. And my first question to Mr. Boniface will be about the refugee status. If you can hear me, Mr. Boniface. Yeah, my question
Yes,
will
I
be
can hear you.
about the refugee status and how does International Rescue Committee incorporate climate resilience into economic recovery programs, particularly for the marginalized groups like refugees and the displaced persons?
Thank you, Victor. And I really resonate because for International Rescue Committee, our work is not only just about also being on the recovery bit, but we are also keen on what we look at the anticipatory action just before either disaster or any hazard happens on how we prepare the refugees and the displaced persons to be able to recover and be more adapt to the situation. But specifically looking at this is that we have a very robust program within the urban called the Rebuild Project. Rebuild is refugees in East Africa boosting urban innovations for on this chart. See how we can support refugees to boost their livelihoods and attain economic self-reliance. And one of the critical components is also on the climate resilience and building up on green jobs. Specifically, we have had the opportunity to expose and support refugees to be trained on solar skills or solar-related skills, which has really prepared them to be more of just a workforce within the industry in terms of solar installation, repairs, and a bit of work on that. And this seems to be really creating jobs. At the same time, you find them contributing more on the climate mitigation. Number two, you look at in the urban cities, now we are grappling with the issue of waste recycling, solid waste, and more importantly, I specifically speak about e-waste, electronic waste. Partnering with the relevant stakeholders, we have exposed and supported refugees to access skills on e-waste recycling, which involves mobile phone repairs, involves laptop repairs, stock of other electric appliances at our homes, which may be disposed into the environment, but this being given as opportunity to recycle them and then reuse them. We do also really support and provide small business grants, which is geared towards setting up SMEs that are climate resilient. Looking at different sectors, it could be artifact recycling, or those who want to develop or work on the repackaging materials, just to mention but a few. I must say that Kenya, being one of the refugee hosting regions and also in the front lines on the climate change, we find that we as a country and also work with the different stakeholders for the refugees, we really need to aspire to come up with better innovative and inclusive approaches which can support climate resilience. And for the urban refugees, this really need to come out strongly, because if not mitigated in good time, like you realize that in the early of this year, we had a bit of heavy flash floods, many people displaced, but we really have to develop community that is quite resilient. To mention within the rural economy, and as I spoke earlier, I talked about the Dab refugee complex, I talked about Kakuma in Turkana County. We do support and expose refugees to climate smart agriculture initiatives, which has the double role of enhancing food security, as well as also contribute more meaningfully to different pathways of income in case they sell out any excess farm produce. So this to us comes as a priority, and we'll really love to continue engaging different actors, and more importantly, see if they sustain investment and policy integration, which are very key in unlocking the full potential of this strategy that I've listed above. So, and just for the last part on it, right now and this week, as an actor within this space, we have joined other national actors and regional actors in developing anticipatory action implementation plan for the Kenya Country Program, which are all these geared towards how we can have a better inclusive and more climate resilient population and communities.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Boniface, for the insights and giving us a detailed view of what really is entailed in the International Rescue Committee and how the climate change therefore cuts across, affecting everyone in their different spaces in diverse ways. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our discussion today. But remember, tomorrow we'll be having the day 2 conversation around different issues. And seeing that there's no question in the chats and there's no raise of the hand, perhaps I'll take this time to thank you so much for joining us today for this first day of the Africa's Pathway to Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation webinar. We have had a productive and inspiring day. I've gotten to learn a lot from the different stakeholders who have shared their views and engaged us in a detailed discussion about their initiatives, organizations, and what is really happening and what is being championed for as we head towards COP29. I believe that you have also had some takeaways from the insightful conversations and from the innovative ideas and important calls to action. Other than that, thank you so much. And remember to stay tuned to Switch Media on our social media platforms. And thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Asanteni sana.
Asante sana.
Thank you. Bye all.
Asante.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.